While your day is winding down, they're just getting started. This is South Coast Tonight with Chris McCarthy and Marcus Farrow. They've got you covered on all the news of the day, from local issues to politics on both sides of the aisle. This is the place where the movers and shakers come to be heard, to listen, and where they're held accountable. This is South Coast Tonight on WBSM.
We're not going to take calls.
No, we're not.
All right, I'll put this aside.
How many
No, we're
times
not.
did you talk to Tom Kennedy today?
No. Welcome to South Coast Tonight.
Here's Tom Kennedy.
We'll be having a caller-free segment with New Bedford Mayor Jon Mitchell.
People are going to think that that's at my request.
No. Listen, I want to be
They know we don't like them.
I want to be very clear. It's entirely our
I
us.
want to dissociate myself with those last comments.
Entirely our doing, because that's the decision that we made.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So you can call during Tim's segment, and here we like to talk a little bit more. So, Mayor Mitchell, thanks for joining us.
Great to be here. I want to just tell all the listeners that even at this early point, this show has been a huge success for me because I got a complimentary mug from you guys tonight.
Yes.
It says Marcus and McCarthy. I just wonder how you guys sorted that order out.
My mom made the mug, so I can't.
All right. So that answers it.
I asked my mom to do it, but she didn't answer.
Enough said.
So, anyway, so
Mr. Mayor, you've unleashed on the city and on the state, I should say, a new housing plan.
what an interesting choice of words. Unleashed.
Unleashed.
Yeah.
Well, look, it's the
Unleash
biggest.
the Kraken. Kind of.
Yeah.
Well, it's the biggest topic, not only in the city, but in the state, and in really in the United States,
nationally,
right?
Too. One of them certainly.
A lot of good stuff in there. You point out a lot of the factors that make New Bedford unique. But I do like the fact that you're saying it's not New Bedford's responsibility alone.
Right.
It is an entire region's issue.
Right.
And look, I think it's about time someone said what the suburbs have been doing. I know because when I was a selectman, I was part of it. All right. Specifically, we didn't want to bring sewerage into the town because we wanted to keep it the way it is.
I mean, sewage service. You certainly didn't want to bring sewerage.
No,
into
sewage service. Service. I'm sorry, sewage service into the town, because when you just have septic systems and wells, it limits the amount of development they can do. Right. I mean, you can't have big multi-family apartments with a lot of kids in the schools if you don't have sewage lines.
Right.
It's really
that's right.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, it's a very subtle.
It avoids the attorney general too.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
If you live in the city, you probably don't ever realize that.
Yeah. No, it's a great point. So what we did,
Sorry
just,
for
I
it,
think,
John.
no. I mean, we've BSM did a great job covering the press conference today.
There's a story on WBSM.com you can check out.
Kate was there today covering it, and it was great to see her there. Because I know you guys are the station's stretched for coverage, but obviously it was an important announcement, and she was there to cover it. Look, I mean, it's no secret that the housing crunch, loosely speaking, has been a topic of conversation and a real problem for New Bedford, but pretty much every city in the country, pretty much everywhere in America, except in the most rural areas.
Sure.
A few years ago, it was primarily a big city problem, right? And I can just remember at the U.S. Conference of Mayors meetings a few years ago, the big city mayors were focused on issues of gentrification and relatedly mobility, people getting around. If cities, more people came into cities and they're growing, it becomes harder to move people by mass transit and other means. But now, especially since the pandemic, it's an every city problem. And a lot of it's been driven, most of it has been driven by larger market forces, historically low interest rates up until very recently.
Right.
High commodity prices, right? Lumber, although that's come back down as well, just to use one example, and as well as a number of other things. And so, there isn't anything, we've talked about it before, but we don't presume that we can sort of solve it all here, right? But there are a number of things that we can do that I think will make a dent. And if we're doing things that are, proven to be effective. And so that's what this plan is primarily about, primarily about increasing housing supply, right, which will tend to drive down prices, all else being equal. We do that by ensuring that the right kinds of subsidies are going to the right kinds of development. We ensure that we do everything we can to remove barriers to development. And that we continue to recruit developers and bring them into the city so that we can see more construction going on. So all those things, and meanwhile, facilitating the removal of vacant properties from their vacant status and getting them back on the market. We don't have a ton of vacancy in the city, but and every city has sort of a irreducible amount of vacancy at any given time.
Sure.
Housing turns over. There are people who are living alone and they die, and their house gets caught up in probate or whatever, right? So that there's always some number of folks in that position. But I think we can make some. I think we can make some traction on that front as well. There's some properties that are stuck in land court. There's some properties in tax title and so forth. So we can move those things along as well. There are a number of measures that we can take. We also want to promote home ownership. I think that's very important for the stability of neighborhoods. We've seen, especially in our tenement neighborhoods over the last 20 years, owner occupancy plummet. And so if you go to the near North End, you're looking at roughly a 20%, and that may be a little liberal. It's probably lower than 20% owner occupancy rate. All those houses originally were built right as mill housing, where the arrangement was, family on the first floor, cousin on the second, grandparents on the way, or some permutation of that, right? It's pretty rare these days. Okay. And so then that has the ownership of by absentee landlord has, to my mind, caused a certain destabilization of those neighborhoods. So we want to promote owner occupancy. I think that's really big. And then for people who are on the edge, we want to make sure that we're providing resources to support them. So we're increasing rental assistance. We're ensuring that we want to ensure that if someone's on the edge of getting kicked out because they can't pay the bills, they've lost a job, whatever the circumstances, that we can get them in and get the support they need. There are a number of things here. There's some 22 measures. A lot of the stuff we have been doing.
Sure.
So it's and I say that so that people don't think, well, you've been doing this and now you come out with a plan. It's all just sort of window dressing. It's not. There's a lot of new things in there, but having it all packaged together so that people understand there's a strategic approach to this, that we're not just, this isn't knee-jerk. We've taken in the input from a lot of folks in public hearings, housing experts, developers, and our own experience. Whether we experience these housing issues every day with people coming in looking for housing, developers looking to come in and develop. So this is really a synthesis of all that. It has been framed, as you know, as a regional problem because it is. It's not as though the regional economy, or in particular the housing market, is confined neatly to the municipal borders. Right. It's a greater New Bedford wide problem, and the reality is that, and as we take pains to point out in the plan, a disproportionate amount of the poverty in the region is in New Bedford. About 78% of the poverty, even though New Bedford accounts for almost 50% of the population of Greater New Bedford. Greater New Bedford being the contiguous suburbs plus the tri-towns, right? Marion, Mattapoisett, and Rochester. So, and we know that the towns, at least based on the most recent data, don't comply with Chapter 40B, which requires that 10% of the housing has to be income restricted, or else the state can just sort of override zoning restrictions, right? So that compliance isn't there. So the idea here is that, look, I get it. I mean, you make a very compelling point as someone who had been a selectman in Freetown and how it works. It's the towns don't want it, but they have to at some point become part of this conversation. So that's because you can't say to New Bedford, you will bear the burden of everybody with needs in Greater New Bedford. It's the happenstance of where municipal borders were drawn, 200 years ago, shouldn't dictate how this broader economic issue is addressed.
I mean, to that point, the Rogers School's been languishing here for like a decade, and there was a proposal for housing to build in that lot housing. And someone had commented, I keep bringing it up, but someone had commented in a forum about it on Facebook. It looks like they're building a Melville Towers in our quaint little town, to which I'd say, so what if they are, And so I think there's probably a lot of NIMBY attitudes here in Fairhaven, where we live, in Dartmouth, Freetown, et cetera, that we probably need to, dispel.
Well, you got to correct it politically. You can't just dismiss it, though, because it's a real force.
Of course, yeah.
And if you're a select person in one of these towns, you're going to get pushback. I mean, that's the nature of it. But we got to do something different, and it can't just be New Bedford, given its constrained resources, shouldering the entire load. It's just, and you look at how the implications of the concentration of poverty, of which there are many in the city, among other things, the vast majority of high need students in the region are in the New Bedford public schools. And nobody can with a straight face say that has no bearing on educational performance.
If I could just make one suggestion, I had no intention of doing this. I didn't even think we were going to cover this, but probably the thing you could help the suburbs with is by lending your professional staff, planners, things like that, to help the cities, to help the towns, because they don't have those people, right?
Yeah.
So they don't even have, a developer comes in, they have no municipal research ability, no expertise really at the municipal level, where you probably have a couple of, not that you can spare them, but it would probably help a lot. And I'm just thinking my experience in Freetown.
I think it's a great point. There are capacity constraints there, although the towns have, it varies, but there are a lot of talented people working in municipal government in the towns, right? You can only stretch people's days so far, totally right? So I agree with you. Yeah, if we can be helpful, we'll do that. We've had some conversations outside of the city about it, especially with the state delegation. It's tricky for them as well, right? But they see the problem very clearly. I mean, most of them represent parts of the city and parts of the towns, and they see the different approaches, and they're kind of hard to reconcile.
To that end, actually, speaking of the state delegation, I had gotten a press release from Tony Cabral's office. They'd talked about seeking an expansion of the HDIP funding. We had Lieutenant Governor Driscoll on a couple weeks ago. She talked about how they want to quintuple it, basically, the HDIP funding. What is HDIP, just for people who don't know, and what role is it playing in your comprehensive housing plan?
What's the acronym stand for? Housing, H is housing.
Housing
D is development.
Incentive
program.
Yeah.
HDIPs. I just don't, it's like lots of other acronyms.
You
use it all the time, but I can't remember what it stands for. Yeah, so HDIP is a state program that allows for the subsidizing of the construction of housing units. It differs from most other housing subsidies in that it doesn't come with an income restriction. So most of the subsidies that are out there, and the most prominent one is the so-called low-income tax credit, right? Which says that if you, and this is really important. I'm glad we've raised the topic of subsidies, because not all subsidized housing is the same. The most popular version is the low-income tax credit, which says that if you, and it's funded by the state, actually it's funded by the federal government, passed through the states, administered by the state, but it essentially says this: if you build housing that restricts the amount of rent that you can charge somebody, we'll give you this tax credit, and you can sell the tax credit to investors and whatever. So it's free money, and it makes the whole project more profitable. But the catch with it is not just in the cap on rent, but it's also the fact that you can only rent it to people of a certain income for not just for a year, not just 5 years, but for 30 years. Right. And that is a really important point, right? So, as a city, we have built a lot of housing with, or have facilitated the construction of housing with low-income tax credits, which is appropriate, right? We want to make sure people of a certain income have available housing. Everybody wants that. But you have to be careful about concentrating too much poverty in one place. And with the LIHTC, as it's called, low-income tax credit, another acronym, you're essentially saying if you build this and use this tax credit, only people of a certain level of income can be there for 30 years, for a whole generation. Right. So it does lead, and a lot of people who look at this stuff have said, it comes with the risk of putting too much poverty in one place, and when that happens, then you have there's no avoiding it. I mean, the problems associated with poverty play out in neighborhoods and in schools and so forth. What we ideally want is to have a city of mixed income, people of every income level sending their kids to the same school districts and all, and there's a lot of good that can come from that for everybody, right? That's the I don't call it the utopian ideal, but that's kind of what you want to shoot for,
right?
And the reality is the incentives are set up now, and the barriers to construction in the suburbs are set up such that a lot of these projects get pushed into the center city, and there's some risks there. So what this plan tries to do is strike a balance. We're going to be we'll do income restricted housing, but we'll only do it up to a certain level to ensure some mix of income levels. And we're open to doing more when we see progress in the towns. And the towns, start to comply with 40B when we start to see income restricted properties, units being built there.
Let's take a break, and then we'll be right back. We're here with New Bedford Mayor Jon Mitchell. So we're here with New Bedford Mayor Jon Mitchell. He released a comprehensive housing plan today. It's stuff that, it's basically, it's stuff that you've been working on for a while.
And where can people see this, John?
Right on the city's website.
Okay.
It's posted on social media, so if you go to my Facebook or Twitter, you can download it there too.
Well, better yet, they can see it on WBSM.com.
There we go.
So we can get some page clicks.
Go to my Facebook.
No, yours. We need page clicks. It's literally our currency.
Yes, that is our currency, right? We're printing money over here. We're like the Federal Reserve. So, Mayor Mitchell, you as you rightfully point out, you've been doing a lot of this stuff that's in the plan. This isn't like you just printed the thing. You have, for instance, 450 new units of housing coming online.
Well, about 150, but there's also something more happening too. In addition to that, that we haven't counted up. This say another 50 more or so, and then this another wave after that. So
yeah, so over time, around that figure, yeah. So
and you're doing that by leveraging ARPA funds, things like that, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, one of the things you specifically mention in your comprehensive housing plan is the Community Preservation Act funds. And I've reserved time and space, and so does Chris, every week on this every day on this program to talk about how important this Community Preservation Act is, because there's one elected official that, based on some whimsy, wants to try to kill the Community Preservation Act in New Bedford. So why is Community Preservation Act spelled out in your plan. What role is it playing in fixing the housing situation in New Bedford?
Yeah, well, so as you know, the voters of the city adopted the Community Preservation Act back in 2014. So 2014 or 2015, whichever it was. And it's been a big success, right? Its purpose is to allow a city to pool resources for the purpose of promoting historic preservation, creating affordable housing, and upgrading open space, right? And those are all things that everybody likes. And so the city, like other places, and New Bedford was among the first cities. We weren't the first, but they were among the first cities in the state to adopt the CPA. It had been mostly adopted by towns. And, so the money comes from a number of places. So there's a surcharge on property tax bills, right? That creates sort of the base. And then that is matched with a certain amount of state funds every year. We use that in the application process to leverage still more funds. So, and let me just explain that a little bit. So we have a community preservation committee that receives applications, and it's independent of the mayor. It's independent of the city council. It receives applications for historic preservation projects, open space projects, and affordable housing. And it vets those projects. One of the criteria they use, so there are lots of criteria, right? It's sort of the quality of the project and any respects, but also how much private funds are being put into the mix, right? Because we want to make sure that the public dollars are going as far as they possibly can. We want to leverage private dollars. So over the since it's been instituted, we've done, I think it's about $15.4 million in projects, and there's been about 7.2, if I remember. If I'm off a little bit, it's not by much.
Right.
7.2 million in New Bedford funds, right? So we've got over 100% return on investment. New Bedford has on these projects. That's a pretty good return on investment, anybody would say, right? So, and so it's gone to projects in every single ward of the city, all the city's major parks.
Ward 2, I think, is the most beneficial, actually. That's the one that's benefited the most, Ward 2.
It may be, because we've put a fair amount of funds into Brookline, but we've put a fair amount of funds down on the peninsula, Ashley Park, things like the Siemens Bethel, things like what else off the top of my head?
You've got the Cape Verdean
Women's Center,
the Strand Theater.
So there's a number. They're all over the city.
Totally transparent. I've gone through the applications. It's probably the most transparent process you have in the city, quite frankly. Then it goes to the city council.
Well, I like to think.
Well, what I mean,
come on, Chris.
He got in the middle of that, and he's like, "Oh man, I just got to follow that through."
What are you trying to say?
You know what? It's like complimenting your girlfriend on her dress, right? Oh, you don't like the other one?
Just be really careful.
I love the way you did with your hair. You didn't like my hair before, right? But what I mean by that,
some of the most visible projects.
There you go.
Right?
The public can see all the
People
funding.
can see this stuff,
Yeah.
like upgrades in parks and historic preservation, like First Baptist Church, right? I mean that got a bunch of CPA funds. So it's a really good program. It's a very popular program. We propose in this in the housing plan that we'd like to see, would recommend to the committee that more funds go into housing. I think there's a need there. Plus, we've spent a lot of money on the parks. It's not to say that the parks don't need continual care. Of course they do, and upgrades. But
Pete Boswell only works so hard.
Yeah, right. But we're doing, and we're doing a lot of park work using our ARPA funds as well. So I think, so that's one of the many proposals in the plan. But the CPA is a good thing. It's been a very solid, a very productive program for the city. I know the folks, the historic preservation folks like Whale, really like it. The Friends of all the parks, the Friends groups, Hazelwood, Buttonwood, and Brookline really like it. They're big
They don't
supporters.
just like it; they need it.
What's that?
They don't just like it; they need it.
They need it, and they really appreciate it. And you know what? Having those resources helps engage people, right? All those groups will tell you, they like to remain engaged with their parks that they live around because they know the city's committing resources to them. The city's stepping up.
Yeah.
And I think the housing advocates in the city would say, yeah, we could use more money for housing.
I know that the park in the South End, Hazelwood Park, has gotten some really good recreational dollars down there, bowling, outside bowling, lawn bowling stuff. I mean, really things that you would say, how much different would the city be if this was all gone? It really, it's just not a good idea. And John, I think it's a good pivot point because let's get to the vetoes.
What vetoes?
The ones
you guys are talking about a little bit.
It's important because the city council voted how they voted for those ballot questions, but now they have an opportunity to, which we often don't have, to go back in time, to rethink their votes, to look at your logic, and to maybe do a little more deep thinking than they did the first time around, and correct maybe something that they hadn't looked at properly, and to not override your vetoes. There's still some votes out there. They've got a vote coming up.
Yeah. Well, and I appreciate the analysis that you guys did of the matter. I mean, I think you talked a lot about my position, and I tried to spell it out as clearly as I could. Look, you had these three relatively momentous proposals, and now, mind you, they're non-binding, but they are big items, right? These aren't things you just sort of trifle with. The retraction of the CPA, the repeal of the CPA, the change in the term of the mayor after one mayoral election with a 4-year term, right? A suddenly proposed reversal of that, and then
it won't affect the next one you run for re-election, though.
Wonder when I was going to open the door to some talk about that.
You can't see we're setting you up.
And then there's the rent control thing, right? Which is a hugely complex
rent stabilization.
Oh, yeah.
Don't forget to use the Marxist term. We changed the language, not just the economy.
Yeah. So, look, they were all put on there
blithely,
right? Yeah. Hastily, without process, without input, and I think things need to get slowed down, right? And when it goes back up, I think there's shouldn't just be a voice vote. There should be a roll call, right? I think that's going to be important so that everybody knows where each counselor stands. And I've had a number of really good conversations with counselors about where they stand, and I think it's probably, at least what I've gotten from them, is that's where they stand is not exactly where they appear to have voted.
I'm getting the same thing, John.
Yeah.
It seems to me because there was a lack of process, a lack of thought, some people were steamrolled maybe into voting, or didn't give it enough thought, didn't even know it was coming up. So now they've got a second chance.
Yeah, I think they just need to slow these things down. And look, there have been some, there's this housing plan. I think it should be treated as an intervening event. Nobody wants to be seen as reversing their votes, but if there's new information, it could be. Well, so the city has a comprehensive plan to deal with housing, and we've heard a lot from the likes of the chamber, the likes of the Realtors Association, you guys, lots of others calling them up saying, ixnay on the rent control, right? So that.
Well, at least I have it.
Well, yeah, but I mean, a lot of folks have pointed out that. Look, and by the way, on the matter of rent control or rent stabilization, I totally get it. Look, I mean, you see people getting their rents jacked up all of a sudden, like that's not a good thing, right? And shame on those landlords who have gouged people.
There has to be an acknowledgement that there's unscrupulous landlords. Price gouging on rents. It's not every landlord. It's not a majority of them, but we've seen some of that, especially some of the out of town folks who've moved in and pulled that stuff, and not all the out of town folks, right? I know cast too broad of a net here, not nearly, but so I totally get it. But in the idea of controlling the rent, the level of imposing a price control is, on the surface of things, a sensible place to start, but the rent control has a very checkered history in the United States. It's as I said in the letter, the old saying goes that
economists rarely agree on anything, but except that rent control doesn't work, right? So it runs the entire political spectrum, and it's especially dangerous in a housing market like ours. We don't have developers lined up outside the door like the major metros do, the closest one being Boston, but there are other examples around the country. Because of the marginal profitability of new housing developments here, we can't be erecting more barriers to development. If we're telling developers, well, you can come, we'd love to have you come here and build housing for folks, but we're going to limit the amount of money you can make, they're going to be like, well, I'm going to the next closest city, right? So what am I doing with you guys?
Particularly where
and look, it's if you understand, it's not the public sector that builds housing, it's the private sector, and everybody in the private sector wants to make a profit.
We're going to take a break. We'll be right back with New Bedford Mayor Jon Mitchell.
New Bedford's News Talk Station, 1420 WBSM.
Place 200-300.
They know the local issues from the inside out, and they call it like they see it. Chris McCarthy and Marcus Farrow are back with more South Coast Tonight on WBSM.
Welcome back to the show. I'm Chris McCarthy.
Marcus
Farrows, as always, holding the fort.
NPR whisper now. This is
welcome to NPR.
We're not hyped up on coffee.
Right.
The housing is a major issue. The rent control piece, Mr. Mayor. I liked your letter. I thought you pulled no punches. I think that's required. You have to tell developers that you're going to make the case for it not to go forward because it does quell development. But in this, we do have a new housing chairman, Shane Burgo. He's a really nice guy, but I do think he's out of his depth. And the fact is he only held a total of less than 3 hours worth of meetings for his housing committee. One of the reasons that he said he didn't is because he was so busy meeting with you and negotiating with you on the ARPA funding to get it into housing. What's your recollection, if any, of those meetings?
Yeah, I mean, I don't look. Let me say this. I think Shane is he cares a lot about these issues. Obviously, there are things I don't agree with him on.
Yes.
Rent control is actually it's probably the primary one. There may be others, but that's
you don't know what's coming next week.
That's come up. Come to the fore recently. But I hope to work with him. In the time ahead to try to advance this plan and try to, and in fact, the plan has one of the items that I think he's championed to his credit, which is the changes in the zoning that will make it easier to establish accessory dwelling units like the so-called in-law apartments. I think that could be helpful. I don't think it's going to work a major change at all, but I think what we're trying to do is use a set of policies that altogether might make a difference, and that's one of them. So look, I hope to work with him and the entire council to try to advance the stuff and not try to reach for something that might a policy that doesn't work, but might satisfy a handful of people who are screaming for it, namely rent control.
No, I don't want to put you on the spot, but if I was to, but you're a former U.S. attorney, you can handle this. If I was to,
I wasn't a witness.
Tonight you are. If I was to look at your calendars. Would I find a meeting about ARPA funds with Shane Burgo?
I certainly talked to him about ARPA funds. Yeah, I talked to pretty much every single counselor about.
But you have no recollection of a meeting where he negotiated with you to get more ARPA funding for housing?
I think I think it's fair to say. I don't have a specific recollection. I think he raised it with me.
Thank you.
But look, it's to my mind, what I'd like to. He cares about this stuff. I want to work with him to advance this stuff for the betterment of people in the city who really need housing.
So I actually want to talk a little bit about offshore wind. I'd asked, I think spoke briefly about this, but I'd asked Governor Healy about the Avangrid situation, which they're looking to opt out of a purchase power agreement that they had. Senator Mike Rodrigues, who's the chair of Ways and Means and a South Coast senator, said he wants to basically ban anybody who backs out of their contract from making any more bids. Governor Healy gave me an answer that was fairly non-committal, but seemed like was leaning towards she wasn't supportive of Senator Roderick's idea. What's your position on it?
Yeah, I get the concern, and Avangrid's a big company, and it's a subsidiary of a even bigger company, energy company called Iberdrola, which is based in Spain. Mm-hmm. And I think there's probably, and I don't want to speculate too much, but we were just talking about this at length yesterday at the offshore wind conference in Baltimore that I spoke at. That there were a number of foreign companies that are.
That was a good pivot. I was gonna ask you about that after.
Yeah. All right, good. I'll hold that thought. But I think some of these European companies are getting used to doing business in America. I think in Europe there is a very knitted relationship between business and government that isn't quite the same here. That's more arm's length here. I think appropriately so, and so I think Avangrid bid in a little too aggressively at a price that it ultimately wasn't going to be able to sustain, and they're trying to back out, and they put a lot of political pressure on the incoming governor. So I don't know that it should totally disqualify them from future rounds, as Senator Roderick has proposed. Although that's not a crazy position at all to take. I think there's got to be a little more flexibility, but. The reality is that Avangrid's put itself at a whole lot of risk by doing that.
Sure.
I think the Commonwealth should try to hold fast to what had been bid in the original bid and what's called the third round, the third solicitation in the state. That's the one that Avangrid won, and just hold them to that.
So you were the keynote speaker at a offshore wind, the port committee meeting at an offshore wind conference in Baltimore. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, so that was it's a conference of the Business Network for Offshore Wind, which is and this is in its 10th year. It started off with 20 people in a room, and now they're up to almost 4,000. And their growth mirrors the growth of the offshore wind industry in the U.S. and it's not just Europeans coming over. Most of it are American companies getting into the business. And so there was an opportunity for me to talk about all the stuff that's going on in New Bedford, and that includes and this is coming from them, a startling amount of infrastructure construction in the port. We're doing more than pretty much anybody in the country, according to port experts, right? And we've talked about it before. We've done the planning, we've built the relationships at the federal and state level to try to facilitate grant making. We've worked with developers. We've done all this, a number of other things to put ourselves in a position to modernize the port. And now, drive around, you'll see all these cranes on the waterfront and all that construction going on, and it didn't happen by accident. Stuff that we've been working on for a long time. It's a little less visible. The work's a little bit less visible to the public, although you do see the cranes because it's out on the water, right? So it's not like buildings going on,
right?
But it's a lot of capital being invested in the port, setting the city up really strongly for frankly the next 50 years. So I will just note, I know we got a break. There was a big New Bedford contingent at this conference, and businesses and a number of other folks, and it was really, really great to see.
Big New Bedford contingent. No one invited us.
No.
Well, next time. Next year. There's always next year.
All right, let's take a break. So, So we were talking to our friend Ted Nisi earlier today, and he had a good story that was out on WPRI about low voter turnout in the Bristol County cities, to include New Bedford. One of the proposed solutions is to switch to an even year election instead of an odd year like Rhode Island has done. Based on the story, you seem to have a little bit of resistance, more so than your other.
Remind me what I said.
Well, they just said in broad strokes that you were reluctant to support switching
to move city to state elections calendar.
Yeah, to move it to the state elections calendar.
Yeah, I think. voter turnout is really bad, and we've talked about it before, and we've tried a lot of different ways to drive turnout, ranging from nowadays mail-in voting and early voting, and loosening up the absentee voting rules, more promotion, more continuing to have probably more voting locations than we really need, right? We've got some voting locations where a handful of people show up, and it really sort of begs the question, well, should you be consolidating some of these sites, right? But we continue to hold those sites open just to make it as easy as possible. And they've taken a number of other measures. So it's hard. There are some cultural changes going on in the United States that we don't fully understand, although we understand some of it, that has driven people away from the civic life of the city, and lots of other stuff, military service, church attendance, et cetera, et cetera. Right. It's the bowling alone problem becoming much worse than Robert Putnam, the author of that book, probably ever envisioned.
Sure,
right?
Absolutely.
And that is, you could have a whole discussion about that. I'm open to more ways in which we could possibly drive more people out to the polls. More candidates helps, right? That tends to help. Doesn't always help. We saw what happened in Ward 3. We had a whole bunch of candidates, but it didn't in the preliminary, but it didn't do it.
Would you encourage people to run?
People should run. Yeah, people should run. Yeah, more the better, right? It's actually. I'll get to your question, Mark. He's a trained cross-examiner. He's not going to let me walk away from the question. But yeah, I mean, people. I encourage people to run for office. You've run for office. You're an office holder right now, right?
Yeah,
Marcus?
I actually just stepped down.
Oh, you did?
Yeah, this job's too much.
That's not going to encourage anybody to run for office.
Well, if they have a choice to talk radio show, get a talk radio show.
What kind of example are you setting?
Run for office unless you get a nightly talk radio show.
Right.
Yeah, I think what I'd say to people is, if you talk to people who run for office, who put their...
Hold on. Do you support changing the election calendar from odd years to even years? I hate to interrupt.
Yeah. I don't see it as making that big of a difference.
Okay. Why is that?
Well, I think it may it may allow for a higher turnout, slightly higher turnout. It may diminish municipal issues on the ballot.
Yes.
Oh, true.
Good point. Drown out messages.
And honestly, I feel strongly this way, having served for a while now in municipal government. Municipal issues are really important. It's the stuff that it's most visible of, all government action, right? It's public safety, it's the schools, it's trash pickup, it's parks, it's all the stuff that we've been talking about. So, I'm skeptical. I'm open to saying if someone has a study that says, well, when this city switched to the same year as the same time as the state, we saw all kinds of good stuff happen, a rebirth of civic life. Yeah, I'd say, okay, well, let's take a look, but I'm a little skeptical.
I think it would.
So, but just
crowd.
Can I just get back to, because I think is what I want to say about running for office is this: you talk to anybody. I say this about a lot of stuff, like military service is another one, right? You never run into anybody who says, who served in the military and says, you know what, that was a complete waste of time. Why did I do that? I should never have. You never hear anybody with regrets, right? They may regret some part of it, but they don't regret the decision to do it. Right. The same is true of folks who run for political office. And because everybody, regardless of the result, people say, I learned something about myself. I pushed myself hard. I learned something about